Hey guys, and welcome to the very first preview to my newest project, the Procedural Foliage Tool. This is a heavily modified version of the Foliage Spawner that I showed you guys a few weeks ago in one of my videos. So I got this idea because I got a lot of good feedback and comments from people asking me about the tool and if there was a way that they could get the tool or download it or when it would be ready. So that gave me the idea to actually further develop the tool and make it its own little project. Now, as you're going to see today, we have a lot to cover, and this is actually a much smaller project than obviously things like the animal behavior kit or the procedural city generator. However, there's still a lot that I was able to accomplish, and I'm really happy. So let's not spend too much time talking, and let me show you what I have. Because I've been really excited to finally showcase it. So I'm gonna make this full screen here, and just to quickly give you a showcase of what I have here. So this is a quick scene that I made with my new tool. You can see that there's a lot of foliage and flowers, a lot of grass. There's the road. This is MRT. I have a lot of different trees here, and specifically the pines. I have some bushes here. There's some random objects that you'll see why they're there. If I go this way, you'll see that I have a little kind of like a little sea port area here, and there's a little river that comes down. If I go underneath the river, you can see there are some rocks. And there's again several layers. There's the sand layer, and then there's the rock, and then there's the grass. So everything you see here will be included as part of the project. So the first thing I'll do is let me go back to game mode here, and the first thing I'd like to show is the material. I've always wanted to make a much better version of the procedural material that I've included with MRT and some of my other projects, which is as you're sculpting your terrain, the material already blends the different layers based on slope and height. What I didn't know, and I finally figured out yesterday, was how can I add grass as part of the material. And I found a bunch of tutorials, but I could never find the right information on how to make it procedural and input the grass on a specific layer. So if I open the material here, I'm going to just show you just a few things. Again, the main point of the project isn't really the material here, but the spawner. But I did want to show you a few things of the material because this, of course, will be included. So there's a few things here. There's like a, just take this off. This is how the material comes with. You have a general spawn density that you can adjust. And you can make this, if you make this number higher, like a 5, you'll see that the foliage density increases tremendously, including the flowers. Kind of crazy there. Or you can make it a lot smaller, a lot more sparse. And you'll see that basically you can quickly control how dense your grass and your flowers are. You can also have separate control, and this is what I had before. So if you can go just to the grass factor and you can make it 5, and you're just gonna have a lot of grass but maybe not as many flowers. Or you could do the opposite and say, no, I want to have a bunch of flowers, and you can increase the factor of the flowers and leave the grass be. So that's really cool. And also you've noticed that there are some parameters here as far as the blend smoothness between the layers. You can specify a start or an end height for the sand. So this is height based. So if I take this out, you'll see, let me just make this bigger, like 1,000 for example. You'll see that the sand starts much higher here, for example. All of this is sandy now because the height, I made the sand start at much higher height. If I go back to -1,000, you'll see that this becomes green. So you have the ability to choose when the bottom layer, which is in this case the sand, appears, and then the rock and the sand and the grass are all blended in addition to that by slope. So obviously if you have a very steep slope, you get the rock. If you have more flat, then you go by height, and if it's below a certain height, you get sand. Above a certain height, you get grass, and only the grass has the foliage spawning automatically. You can also change the textures. You know, in this case, for example, I'm choosing this grass texture. You can turn it off and have kind of the original one that I had here. So very easy to change the textures on the material instance here. And the same thing can be said for the rocks and the sand, including the normal. Another quick thing that I've been working on is this very simple river tool. It's a spline-based tool. So you can see here it's just a spline. And it has this very nifty material. And same thing, you can come here and modify the material real quick. So you can change the color, for example. Just you can make it a little more green if you wanted that, a little more blue. You can also mess with the opacity factor, make it more you know, more transparent, less transparent, and you can play with the refraction effect as well. As you can see, the distortion here, you can make it more or less, and also the roughness and the speed of the material. How fast does the river go? Okay. So I'm not gonna spend a lot of time here, but I really like the fact that I can include this because it does really make a difference in your scene. So you would get this procedural landscape material that blends automatically by height and by slope, and you're gonna get this simple river tool that you can use in your scenes. And now if I go to the Procedural Foliage Tool, you're gonna see a few things that are different here. Let me go ahead and remove everything just to start over and show you guys. And this is what the material looks like, just the grass with the flowers. So the first thing you'll notice is very similar to the foliage. I'm gonna take out the trace, is that you have two different lists. You have an actors list and a hierarchical instance static mesh list. So you can spawn individual actors and then convert them to instance static meshes, or you can spawn instance static meshes directly, right? It depends on the number of meshes that you're trying to spawn. If you want to spawn grass or a special type of grass with the tool, you can definitely do that. Or if you want individual actors like trees, rocks, foliage, anything, then you would go into the actors list. So if I open here, I have 4 actors already selected here. So we'll just go quickly through the options. The first thing you'll notice is that you can either select an actor class or a static mesh. And I'm going to show you an example of an actor class in a second here. In this case, we just have the pine tree. You have max number of spawns that you'd like to have on the volume. You have the collision bounds, which you can change. You have the scale range. In this case, we don't want to change the scale as 1 and 1, but you can have automatically change the scale for some variety. You have the ground Z offset. In this case, we wanted to stick a little bit to the ground, and that helps it feel more grounded in slopes. You can change the yaw automatically, or you can adjust the mesh to align to the surface, right? This is really useful for smaller trees like grass or bushes, but maybe not trees like that. You now have the option of selecting a slope range. In the previous tool, you have a max slope. So this is coming from the original Foliage Spawner from PCG, but I only had this number. I didn't have a lower bound. So now you have the option of having the actual range. So you can say, no, I want this to be only spawning if the slope is perfectly flat or up to 40%. And this is a range between 0 and 1, right? The higher the number, the more steep the slope. or you can select trees that are only spawning on very high slopes. So you could put something like 0.6 to 0.8, right? And that tree or foliage or whatever will only spawn on very steep slopes. Then the new thing here is a height range. So again, I'm thinking about all of the different options that you like when you're spawning your foliage in your scene, and one of them is definitely slope, but the other one is height, right? So there are specific species of plants or flowers that may only appear at a certain height. So if I have a mountain here that's really high, for example, maybe I want specific flowers or trees to spawn in this area simply because it's much higher. Or the same could be said for something lower. Maybe I have specific meshes that I only want to spawn when the terrain is low and sandy here. So you can use the height to now specify another way of spawning your meshes. Right, in this case, I say that I want this tree to spawn between negative 10,000 units and positive 10,000 units. So anything below or above, this tree will not spawn. You have the ability to add additional tags, and you have an array of tags that will prevent the trees from spawning. And automatically it comes with two tags, PFT road, which is the MRT road tool here, and PFT water, which is all of the bodies of water, which is the river, and this water here is supposed to be kind of like an ocean. But you can add as many tags as you like. Whoops. So obstacle avoidance is really important as you're spawning your trees, right? So if you have any buildings or anything like that, you don't want trees spawning on top of your meshes. This is a nice way of making sure that your trees spawn only in the areas that you want to spawn. Pass-through tag, I'm going to explain that in a little bit, but this is basically if you want your foliage to spawn passing through a specific actor. And this was specifically designed so I could spawn meshes underneath the river, at the river floor or at the ocean floor, right? Because if I'm doing a trace, it would hit the actual plane, the top plane that has the material, but we don't want to spawn it at the plane, we want to spawn it at the bottom. Right. So that's, again, a lot more options, right, compared to the previous tool. But really the biggest difference that I've been working on is the spawn method here. So the previous tool just had a random location. It checked for obstacles based on, your parameters. It checked on the slope and decided to spawn or not. In this case, you can see that we have a bunch of different methods of spawning. You have random location, which we're gonna preview each one. But random location, this is the most I guess the most expected one, right? Just pick a random location. Independent clustered around actors, along a spline, random patches, strict grid, or using something I call the spawn zones. So let's just go ahead and give you guys examples of each. So in this case, we're going to spawn 6,000 trees, and we're going to pick a random location. And as long as they meet the slope and the height criteria, and they're not hitting any of the actors with these tags, the trees will spawn. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to spawn index 0 of the actors because this is the tree I want, and I click on spawn actors. And you'll see that automatically says that it spawned 2,943 entities. So that's really nice. Out of the 6,000 trees that I wanted to spawn, it could only spawn a little bit less than 3,000. And you can see here that the trees are spawning here in this area here. Notice that they're following, again, the same category for slopes. If I go down here, you can see the tree still spawns here because this is, again, within the range. But if I go really high, for example here, no trees were spawned here, and the same can be said for this really tall mountain here. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and spawn a few more trees. I'm gonna click again spawn actors, and you can see that it continues to spawn, this time 2,700, spawn again, and you can keep layering the effects, and now you have a lot more trees in your scene. Another cool thing that I want to show you real quick is that I have a spawn history. This is very similar to what you would find in Photoshop if you go to like the history tab, and you have a list of every single action that you've done. So one of the quality of life improvements that I made is that you don't want to just remove all, right, like I did. That's obviously removes everything, but you can also have remove last or remove selected. So if I go to the spawn history, you can see that every time I spawn, I'm going to spawn one more time, I make an entry in this array. And then I can select which action I actually want to remove. So say that the third time I spawned, because I spawned some tree, I want to remove that spawn specifically. I can just select it here, click remove selected, and you'll see that the trees were removed, and that action pine tree _ 2 has been deleted. Right? Same thing here. If I say remove selected, it'll remove only the actors that were spawned that time, and it'll leave the rest here. Right? So you have a lot of control as you're spawning different trees. You have your spawn history here, and you can actually selectively delete or remove your foliage that you want. And if you click remove all, obviously everything's removed and your spawn history is deleted. So let's look at some other ones here. Let me just go ahead and make this smaller. And I'm gonna lower this a little bit more here. And whoops, and bring it here. I'm gonna just use this little area here to spawn the rest of the trees. Actually, instead of that, I'm gonna use this one here. It's a lot more flat and it's a lot easier to showcase. So the first one that I showed, the first spawn method was random, right? Just a random place, and if I just go ahead and choose it here again, you can see that it spawned trees within this volume, and it spawned 2,800 trees, and it spawned them in a random array, right? And if I just hit play here, I haven't converted the trees to instant static meshes, but you can just see that the trees are just spawned in a random pattern. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and remove them all, and we go back to the spawn detail spawn method. Now I'm going to do independent clusters. So this is another method. I was reading into different procedural foliage methods, and this is a way of recursively spawning foliage. This really works better for smaller bushes. I'm going to still show it to you in a tree, but instead of having a random location, what you do is you form clusters, organic clusters. And you can select, for example, the maximum number of trees or actors per cluster here. So I'm going to try to spawn, I'm going to change the number here to, let's say, 500 trees. And I'm going to say I want the max number per cluster to be 100. And you can select a max and an actor extra distant in cluster. I'm going to say 0. There's no reason to have an additional distance. And now if I go back to spawn actors, you'll see that now they've spawned in little clusters. And only spawn 76 in this case. So let me just go back here and remove everything, and let's just increase the number here. Remove all and increase the number to something like 2000, just to give you a better example. And you can see now that there are individual clusters of trees. And the pattern is obviously random, but it can be a lot more organic because it basically looks at the previous spawn and picks a random direction. And that way it can organically grow as normal trees would grow, right? A tree is planted here, and then all of a sudden you know, the kind of the tree line follows a specific pattern. Okay. The next method is clustered around actors, and this is where I'm going to come here and show you guys. So basically, you can select any actor in your scene, and it's going to be by tag. So you can say, I'm going to select an actor by tag, or several actors by tag, and in this case, I think I already had a tag. The tag is called cluster object, and these three objects have the same tag. So if I go back here and say, I want you to spawn these trees around the actors with the tags, and in this case, cluster object. And again, this is an array. So you can have any type of actor or entity in your level, and you can have as many tags as you want. And you can select a distance away from the actor. I'm going to say between 0 and up to 2,000. I'm going to make it 5,000 to give a bigger radius. And I want to spawn, let's see here. Okay, 2,000 trees. I click on spawn actor, and the trees are now spawning around each individual actor with that tag up to, and I think I selected, let me see, up to 5,000 units from the center of the object, as you can see here. So if I were to change this to only 2,000, for example, max distance, and I remove everything, and I try to spawn the actors, you'll see that only 128 actors are spawned because you were only allowed this amount of distance. You could also play with the minimum distance. So you could say, I want a minimum distance of 2,000, but a maximum distance of 6,000 clustered around the actor. And you can see now that you're kind of creating a lot more widespread. So again, it doesn't have to be these three actors, any actors by tag, you can go ahead and do that. Okay, next one, along spline actors. Now this is really cool, right? So any actor that has a spline, you can actually select here. So I'm going to go ahead and select this section of MRT, and I am going to add I'm going to give this one another tag, and I'm going to do let's see, sample spline. Just going to give it that tag, and I'm going to come back here and say, okay, I want you to spawn along the spline actors with the tag sample spline, and I want you to spawn with a minimum distance of 2,000 and a maximum distance of 6,000. And I'm sure you can figure out exactly what's going to happen as soon as I hit spawn actors. Now you have trees spawning along the road, along the spline of the road, and they of course follow the curve of the road. And I could do that for literally any spline, right? So in this case I have the road, but any actor with a spline component you can use to create paths. And again, if I go back and I remove everything, and I change the minimum, say the minimum is going to be, let's say 1,500 to 3,000 only. I go back and I click on spawn actors. You can see now that it's a lot tighter, right? So minimum distance from the center of the spline up to a maximum distance. So this is very common, at least here in the US, have a tree line that goes around and follows the road. As you can see now, we have trees that are following the road. Another cool thing, and I'm going really fast here guys because I'm trying to make the video reasonable length. If I remove everything, there's another option for the splines which I think is really cool, and is you can actually decide whether you want to spawn on the right hand side or the left hand side of the spline, or both, or none, right? So I select I only want to spawn on the right hand side of the spline, and I only spawn this specific tree actor on the right hand side of the spline. You can have another model or another mesh only on the left hand side. So you have a lot of, flexibility into how you want to spawn your trees. All right. Random patches. This is yet one more method that I'm using to spawn. So instead of having more organic clusters, what this does is it creates a little patch area and then spawns trees within that patch area. Think about it as if you were creating programmatically a much smaller volume within this volume at a random location and a random rotation and spawning trees in that area. So if I just do that, random patches, I'm going to take this out. This setting doesn't count at that point. You can have max actors per cluster and an extra distance, and you can have, again, a range of X and Y for the random patches. So you can have a random size for the patch, and in this case I want the patches to be between 50 to 100 in the X and 50 to 100 in the Y. And if I just go and I want to spawn about 2,000 trees, if I go ahead and click spawn actor, you'll see that now the patches look different. Still obeying all of the rules, but now you have a different look for your trees, right? So now you have random patches, they're bigger, and they have a much different pattern than the organic pattern that you saw earlier. And again, these patches are of random size, and you can in random rotation, all within your volume, right? So if I were to go back and delete everything again and spawn them again, you can see that the pattern is always different. There you go. Then you have grid distribution. This is actually pretty neat, and this is exactly what you think. Sometimes you want your trees in a very specific grid format. This is the exact same distribution. So you can say grid, and you can have max extra actor distance in cluster. In this case, I'm going to make this 100 units, just so you can see what I'm talking about here. These settings will not be used, and I want a max number of trees. Let's make this I don't know, 6,000, and see what happens. And I click on spawn actors and you can see that I just spawned a perfect grid. Let me get rid of the fog here real quick so you guys can see better. And you can see that I have a perfect grid. I don't even think I can get in there with my character. There you go. Actually, I can. Perfect grid. All of the trees are spaced by 100 units, and they're still following, you can see here, the rules, right? So when they get to this point here and this slope is too high, they just stop and it just continues, right? So you can see here how programmatically the row is still completely accurate, but in here these trees couldn't continue because of the slope, and the same here and the same here, right? So if I wanted to go back, whoops, and I would delete everything, and I wanted to increase that distance, extra distance of the actor in the cluster, let's make it 500, and I want to spawn actors. Now you can see that it's a little bit more reasonable. We have about 500 units per tree. So why all these different spawn methods? Well, it really depends on what you're trying to do, right? Usually if you go into a section of the forest or a park and where people have planted trees, usually it's very much like a grid, right? Or if you have specific foliage, if you're making a game like a farm, right? If you have specific trees like fruits and things like that, you may want to lay them down in a straight grid, so it looks more like you know, like they were planted that way, right? So in this case, if I want to have a section of my level where they're very much exact, it looks like they were planted, you can do it with the strict grid. or if you want something which is of course looks way more natural, then you have the other options. Cool. Okay, and the last one is spawn on the spawn zone, and these are these little actors here, and this is to give you way more control on the specific area to spawn the actors, right? So why not just grab this actor here and just move it around and make it small? You could do that, but usually you want to have the master tool covering as much of your level as possible, and then you want one specific type of foliage to use, for example, the spawn zone or many spawn zones. So in this case, I have a list here. Say I want to spawn on the spawn zones, and towards the bottom here, I have a list of how many of these spawn zones are to be considered. In this case, I chose these two. And if I click spawn actors, they will only spawn where these zones are. And you can see they're very, very compact because I'm trying to spawn, I think, 6,000 trees. But obviously there's only so many trees that can fit in this area. And again, spawn actors, and you can see that they're spawned there. All right, very cool. So I think we went through all of the major features. I'm going again really fast, guys, because I don't want to make the video too long. But again, the main feature of the project is this procedural foliage tool. You have way more ways of generation, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different algorithms that are used to generate and spawn your trees. You can spawn individual actor classes or prefabs or static meshes. You have individual spawn numbers per tree. That's new. You can make the collision bounds anything you want. You have a random scale, a ground offset. You have a slope range and a height range. And you have specific do not spawn tags. And this can be any or as many tags as you like. And you can have this option for as many trees as you want. So really quickly, let's just go ahead and show you some of the other meshes. If I go back and make this 0, 0, and I make this, I think it was 2500. Let's see, 2500 to cover most of the map. I'm gonna make this higher here, and I go with the first, the first tree, and I like to take a random location up to 6,000 trees. I want to spawn actor index 0. You'll see now that I have 2,900 trees and they spawned in random locations. However, they do not spawn on the roads, they do not spawn on top of these actors, and they do not spawn on top of the river. So you can see the river water because I have those tags. So you can add as many tags as you want. I'm going to go ahead and spawn one more round of these trees here, and you can see we have them there. Now I have another example here of bushes, and in this case I'll do the exact same thing. These are smaller bushes, and I like to spawn them also in a random location, about 2,000 of them, and the same settings, minus 10,000 to 10,000 height range, and the same slope range. So go ahead and spawn the actors here. Oops. Okay, one more time. All right, and I'm gonna go ahead and convert them to instant static meshes. So you can see now if I click on them, you've seen this before, all of the trees are now 1, and that is huge for performance. And same thing if I kind of zoom back here, see if I can find the bushes. Where are the bushes? Can't seem to find the bushes now, but they're there somewhere. All right, the next example is going to be these rocks. So in this case, I want the rocks to spawn along spline actors, and this is a really neat one. I want them to spawn along spline actors with the tags PF river, and in this case I just have this one river, PF river 1, as the example. So I want them to spawn along this river. However, I want them to spawn within distance of 0 to 4,000 units from the spline, which would mean that they would spawn and hit the river here, but you don't want anything spawning on the river. So what I've done is I've created what I call a pass-through tag, and the pass-through tag means that if the trace hits an actor with this specific tag, it'll ignore this mesh and do another trace all the way to the bottom. And in this case, the pass-through tag is PF water, which is the standard tag for the river. And basically what that means is, like, if I go underneath the river and I decide to spawn index number 2, now you see that these rocks are now spawning at the bottom of the river and a little bit on the side. So you have the option of actually spawning foliage underneath your river or your ocean or anything that would be considered translucent. And all you would have to do is configure the pass-through tag and use the along the spline, for example, and you'd have this option here. So if you have any underwater foliage, corals, or you know, any specific rocks, you can now spawn them, and you can see that these are clustered and they are now aligning to the terrain. And finally, the other example I wanted to show you guys is this here, which is the use of an actor. So I have an actor class here that I created, and in this case it literally is just a few snow trees, as you can see here, all in this little weird shape. And I want to go ahead and spawn these guys as well. So instead of a static mesh, you can actually spawn an actual actor. And let's try to spawn about 50 of those. If we go down here and click on spawn actors, nothing. Let's see here. It's not finding space. The reason it's saying 0 is because it's not finding any space, unfortunately, to spawn the actor, because the collision bounds are so big. So I guess if I can just remove, let's see, remove a few of the pine trees here. I'm just gonna remove everything, make it easy, and then I'll go here and spawn the actor number 3. And you can see here that now the actor itself has been spawned, and this is actually a blueprint. So you have the ability to spawn actual individual blueprints. So you can see here, this I added today, so it's a little buggy. I still have a lot of testing to do, but I want to make sure that you have the option of spawning not just static meshes, but actual blueprints. So obviously you can convert them to instant static meshes, but if you have a specific actor, say a specific type of foliage with some interactive script or anything like that, you can now use the exact same principles, slope, height, the exact same traces and features on where and where not to spawn, and you can now use it for actors. And last thing, I'm going to add a new one here. And let's go to meshes real quick, because I forgot to show you this. And I'm going to use environment, trees. I'm going to use the snow tree. And I want to spawn a maximum of 500 of these guys. And they're going to be in a random location. However, I like them to be spawning only above 10,000 up to 40,000. So they're only going to spawn on high altitude. And this is going to be index 4. 49 were spawned. Oops. And it looks like I have a little error here. Not sure what's going on. I have to figure that out. But hopefully you get the idea here. They're spawning only on this height. They don't spawn on the heights below here. They would only spawn on heights between 10,000 and above. So that's pretty much it. What do you guys think? This project is about 95% done. As you can see, there's still little bugs here and there, specifically with the actors and some additional polish. Like, why is this static mesh actor spawning here? That's something that I have to check, right? But as far as the feature set, what do you guys think? Is this something that you'll be interested in? Like I said, this is its own separate project, and I am about done. So I'm challenging myself to actually submit this probably by next week and have it go out. And again, it's a very small project. It's going to be available very cheaply in the marketplace. So if you have any comments or suggestions, or you'd like to see something specific, please do let me know. I still have time to add a few things if I can, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So thank you guys so much, and let me know what you think. I'll talk to you in the next video.